Welcome back to the Create From Us podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Fahrenbach. This is episode 59. And today, at the time of this recording, it is Tuesday, June 23rd. And as I sit in my office recording these episodes, I'm batch creating today, I can see out my window my husband and my kids playing roller hockey in the street. One might say that I am managing my time well because I have quite a busy week this week and next, and so I'm getting ahead of some things. But to that person that would say, I am managing my time well, I would say there is no such thing. Time management is a myth. And that's what I want to talk to you about on today's episode. Last week, I asked you to consider getting rid of the phrase work-life balance from your vocabulary. And this week, I'm asking you to get rid of the phrase time management. If you are anything like me, you have probably said to yourself, I just need to manage my time better, or I just need to figure out a better time management system or tool. I need to steward my time better. And if you're anything like me, you probably have bought a million planners. You have color-coded the heck out of things. You have scheduled things, perfected the schedule, revamped the schedule, tried to implement different systems and hacks, and you have tried to manipulate, you have tried to organize, you have tried to optimize, and it just never seems to do any good because at the end of the day, there's always something that didn't get done. And regardless of the effort you put into it, the result seems to always be the same. There's some ball that's getting dropped, or the day gets away from you and you don't know what happened to the hours that you thought you had. And the reality is, that's because we can't control time. Time was never ours to steward. To steward something is to multiply it, to grow it, to increase it, to bring fruit from it. And you can't do that with time. Time moves on without you. You can't control it. It never slows down. It can't be doubled. And you cannot make it multiply, regardless of what all the time management gurus say. Time moves forward without your consent. And as if to add insult to injury, your biological needs are tied to the solar and lunar systems that God put over time. At the end of the day, time is not a resource you can manage. It's not a resource you can steward. It is a construct that you live inside. God is the only one that truly controls time. He's the one that created the construct and then put humanity within the limits of it. I honestly believe that this limit is meant to remind us that we are finite beings. We are not infinite. We are not outside of time. Only God is. It's a reminder that we are not the creator. We are simply his image bearers. When you try to manage time, you're trying to control something that was never entrusted you to steward. When God put Adam and Eve into the garden, he directed their gaze down towards the ground to work it, to multiply it, to bring forth beauty and goodness from it. He didn't direct their eyes up to the solar system or the lunar system and ask them to manage time. Trying to steward something that hasn't been entrusted to you is very much the same pulse of striving and hustling. Accepting time as a limit is an act of dependence. It's saying, I'm a created being. I only have 24 hours. I can't make any more time. And that's by design. When we acknowledge that, we are reminded that we are not the creator. As I said before, we're just simply his image bearers. We're these small c creators, these ones that are creating as an act of reflecting his goodness and his glory. We're not the ones who started this whole thing. We're the ones who were invited into a process that was already began. Now, if we're not stewarding our time, if we can't steward our time, then what is it exactly that we're doing? Because there is a sense that all of us know, that something can be done, right? Because there wouldn't be so many planners sold. There wouldn't be all these time management systems and all that in place if there wasn't something true at the heart of it. Like there is something we can do about the limit of time. What I want to suggest to you is to stop thinking about it as managing your time and instead think of it as managing your response to the time limit that's placed on your life. So I made a list of ways that people tend to respond to this limit that time puts on us. I am totally guilty of many of these, but I want to read through this list. And as I read through, I want you to think about, have you ever done these? Has this ever been your response to the limit of time? Okay, first one, ignoring the limit entirely. Pretending you can fit 30 hours worth of activity and effort into 24 hours. That has been me. I am the queen of thinking I can do more than I actually have time for. And my husband too. It's always funny when he gives me an estimate about like how long a project's going to take him. I always add a little bit more time because he always underestimates how long things are going to take him. But there is a sense of he thinks he can do more. I think I can do more. And when we two set out a plan, like when we have a day where we're free and we're like, okay, we're going to be so productive. Oh my gosh, we have a whiteboard in our dining room and we'll put up the whole like list of things we want to get done. There's always about 50 hours worth of work on that whiteboard that we think we're going to accomplish. And just completely ignoring the fact that there really is only 24 hours in a day, and a good majority of those you are sleeping and eating. So that's the first one. Anybody else? Anybody else ever experienced that? The second one is letting others dictate your response to the limit of time. And what I mean by this particularly is when we sign up for things, when we opt into things and we're like, oh, this is only this many minutes a week, but we don't factor in everything else around it that's being required of us from that thing that we've opted into. I think the one that jumps out to me the most is when we sign our kids up for things and we're like, oh, that's only once a week for an hour, but we don't calculate our time driving there and back. And maybe one week we have to bring in a snack. And so now we have to factor that into our rhythm. So there's just these things, these little ways in which people who are running something that we've opted into get to make a decision about how we are responding to the time limit that we have. It's not always a bad thing, but what I see happen, and I have made this mistake too often, is that we opt into things without fully evaluating the cost of our response to that, without fully understanding how many hours we actually have to dedicate to that thing. So now we no longer are getting a say in how we're responding to our time limit. Somebody else has already made a decision. You might not think of it this way, but church falls into this category. Now it's a positive thing, right? We should gather with other believers and we should corporately worship God. But you don't get to determine when that happens. You opt into attending church at a certain place and they have a certain time designated. And now you have to drive to that location and you have to prepare before you leave to drive to that location. You have to make sure that breakfast is done before you leave for that location. There's so much that gets determined by just somebody else saying, we're doing church at this time and in this location, and you saying, okay, and signing up for that. Somebody else has determined how you're responding to your time limit. And it's not even just the time that they set, it's everything that you have to do beforehand to reach that moment. And I think that's what we sometimes miss when we're talking about our time and our response to this time limit. Here's another one that I've done, making reactive decisions instead of intentional ones. My biggest problem is when somebody's like, hey, do you want to meet up at a park? And I'm like, yes, let's go. And I'll load up all the kids and I will go to the park because it sounds fun and I want to see my friends and they want to see their friends and we all want to be out in the sunshine. And I totally ignore the fact that dinner needs to get on the table at a certain time. And that means I have to prepare dinner. And that means that I need to be aware of all of that. And instead, I find myself having to pick up food through a drive-through because I have ignored all that. And now the kids are melting down in the backseat. So reactive decisions instead of intentional ones. That is another way that we respond to our time limit. And I am just as guilty as this as anybody. Okay, so the next one, filling your calendar to the brim, where no margin whatsoever. You don't account for things going wrong. There is no buffer window whatsoever. You are just running from one thing to the next, doing the next task, getting things done, hustling throughout your day, rushing, trying to get to the next thing. If something goes wrong, you get frustrated, you get angry. I have been there. I see a spare moment on my calendar and I think, what can I fill it with? I have had to work really hard in recent years to not do that, to not fill in every white space on a calendar. Because the reality is that that is not accounting for the fact that time moves on without us. And when things go wrong, time doesn't care. It just keeps moving. We can't control time moving forward, but we can control our response by not filling our calendar completely full to the very edge, with no margin, with no buffer, with no room to breathe if something should go wrong. All right, the next one, filling up your calendar with things that were never yours to steward. How many of you volunteered for something, said yes to something, started doing something because if you didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. If you didn't say yes, this thing wouldn't have happened. If you didn't volunteer, or maybe you volunteered because you thought, okay, well, my kids, I want to do this for my kids, or I want to do this for myself. And suddenly you find yourself just carrying all these things, doing all these things, having all this responsibility. And you're like, how did I get here? How did I end up with this task on my plate when I don't think that God ever asked me to pick it up? That is a very hard conversation to have with the Lord, but it is a necessary one. If you need help in this area, I created a resource called the 15-minute margin method. And part of this free guide, I walk you through brain dumping all the 4 areas of stewardship of our lives, brain dumping everything that you're carrying. There's something about putting it down on paper and just writing it all out, everything that you've been carrying, that you start to realize what is actually yours to carry and what's not. You can almost tell as soon as you start writing, you're like, oh gosh, I'm doing that and I'm doing that and I'm doing that. And I don't know when I started doing that, but I never really wanted to pick that up. And that's keeping me from this thing over here that I know God wants me to be doing. That's something to pay attention to. So if you want help walking through that exercise, then you can go to rachelfahrenbach.com/margin and download that free resource. But yes, we have limits placed on us, that time moves on without us, that we are within this construct. We have to be very intentional about the things that we're picking up and carrying. All right, the next way that we can respond to the limit of time on our lives is fear. Like, oh, well, I don't have enough time, so I can't do this thing. Or I'm afraid I'm going to waste my time if I do this thing over here. If the only reason is you're afraid of what somebody might think of you or what somebody might say about you if you don't do that thing, or if you do that thing, if that is your response to limited time, is that shouldn't be happening. Like, fear cannot be the driving factor, because when we let fear make those decisions, we're not allowing God to lead us in that decision. And right alongside of it, the same thing with guilt. You cannot make decisions based off of guilt. You cannot respond to that limit of time based off of guilt. Oh, I need to go do this Bible study. I should really be a part of that Bible study because, I just feel guilty if I'm not doing it. Or I really need to bake all of these things for the bake sale by scratch. Otherwise, I just feel guilty if I don't. Like, I will feel like a bad mom. I just feel like all the things, whatever. Or I'm not going to spend time working on my creative pursuit because I feel guilty about the time it takes away from other areas of my life. Guilt is not a good motivating factor. It should not be the basis from which you make decisions. God has entrusted certain areas of your life to steward. He has entrusted your body, your home, your fields, and your tables. It is your job to figure out what those things are that He entrusted to you and to make decisions and responses to that time limit based off of what He's entrusted to you, not based off of fear or guilt. Another response you can make is to allow laziness to consume the time that you've been given. I don't know how else to say that. Oh my word. How many of you have just allowed yourself to keep scrolling on Instagram? I'm raising my hand if you're not watching on YouTube, if you're just listening to this. How many of you have watched just one more episode and in doing so you stay up a little too late, which means you don't get up quite at the right time. And because you don't get up at the right time, you end up not getting into your hour to work quite as well or quite as on time, which then eats away at your time to work, which then means you don't get as many things done. It's just this domino effect, right? Because we didn't have the self-control or the self-discipline to say, no, just one episode. I've been there. I have done that too. This is so hard, especially when the show is so good. Like we're watching Paradise right now. Well, we just finished it actually, and it is every episode leaves you on a cliffhanger. So you're like, oh, Vince, what's next? And then you watch that next one, and then suddenly it's 1:00 in the morning, and you're like, what have I done? Anyway, all that to say, laziness is a response that we can have to our time limit. We can just completely allow that to consume the time that we've been given. The other thing is not respecting, and this kind of falls into the same thing that I was just talking about, not respecting the limits within the limits. If you have listened to any time management systems or hacks or whatever, you probably have heard of time blocking, where you set a time on your calendar to do a specific task. This is really helpful. And most of us have those time blocks, even if they're really loose. Like if your kids are in school, you kind of have a time block. You're like, all right, during this time, I work and then I have to go pick them up. Like that's a time block, even if you haven't really designated it on your calendar as a time block. The problem comes in when those little mini time blocks act as limits within the bigger limit of time, right? Like that time block moves forward to, it's just been designated for something. It's been allocated. It's like a category. But when we don't pay attention to those categories and do the tasks that are supposed to go into that category, that's when we suffer the consequences. So if like you don't pick your kid up from school during the time block that you're supposed to pick them up, there would be really bad repercussions, right? When we have a time block on our calendar to write, we're not writing during that time. There are repercussions to that. That can be one way we can respond to it. We can just ignore the limits that are within the limit. And that causes problems in the long run. So everything we just talked about right now is a response to the time limit on our lives, right? These are ways that we respond negatively, positively to the fact that there is a limit of time in our day. If you're not responding from a place of intentionality, purpose, and in alignment with what God has entrusted to you to steward, then you're not stewarding it. You can steward your response. You can't steward the actual time itself. Time will continue moving forward without you. You cannot control it. You cannot multiply it. You can't stop it. You can't slow it down. You can't double it. But what you can do is control your decisions, your response, and how you move within that limit. And this is where the framework that we talked about a couple episodes ago on the 4 areas of stewardship and the flow that they come from. Your body, home, fields, and tables. And there it is a flow that happens. We start with the body and then we move to the people in our homes and the home itself, the habitat, all the logistics that come along with that habitat. We then move into our fields, our areas of work that we invest in order to see a return that we can then use to continue stewarding our bodies and our homes. And from all of that flows out of it our tables, the communities that we invest in, the relationships that we cultivate, the committees we volunteer on, the places where we show up and we help others and we serve others. And within this, we ask ourselves, what has God given me to steward with my body, with my home, with my fields, with my tables? What has He given me? How can I allocate this within the limit of time that He has placed me inside of? I only have 24 hours in a day. I only have 24 hours in the day. What does this 24 hours need to look like? What does tomorrow's 24 hours need to look like? What does it need to look like on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a quarterly basis, and a yearly basis? When we start asking ourselves that, we prioritize, we layer things onto our calendar, starting with our bodies. We put sleep on our calendar. We put food on our calendar. We put grooming on our calendar. We put exercise on our calendar. And then we put things on our calendar that we feel God has called us to do for cultivating the relationships with others in our home. And then we put in the things that we need to do to steward our home well. And then we put in our fields that we are investing into. And then we layer in our tables. And these can look different from day to day, from week to week, from quarter to quarter, monthly. I forgot monthly, but month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. It can look different. And that is what we're partnering with God in and saying, all right, we have a limit of time. We have 24 hours in a day. How can I best steward these things within that limit? What do I need to say no to, say yes to? What do I need to surrender? What do I need to put back onto my calendar? All of that you have to do with the counsel of the Holy Spirit, seeking God's guidance, because if you do not, you will not be in an alignment with Him, and you'll be acting probably out of fear or guilt or any of the other things that we talked about. Now, this is so funny. Every time I say the word, you only have 24 hours in a day, I can hear my mother's voice in my head, because she would say this to us all the time. You only have 24 hours. You only have 24 hours. And growing up, because we were homeschooled, she homeschooled all 8 of us. And that's a lot of kids to manage, a lot of things to keep track of. And so she had learned this from somebody, I don't even know who, about your 24-hour day and mapping it out. And essentially, she created a spreadsheet for each one of us. When she would plan for our homeschooling years, she would make a spreadsheet where each day she would say like what's allocated to each day, and she would make sure that the total number of hours at the bottom of that day did not go over 24 hours. She was really aiming that number at the bottom was like at 20 or something. She was trying not to overschedule our days. She's just trying to be really mindful of not overscheduling us with our school, the classes she signed us up for, the volunteering that we did. She wanted to make sure we had enough time for homework, for enough time for playing, for enough time for socializing. Whatever it was, she wanted to make sure that we had enough time, that she didn't overschedule us. And so she made us each our own 24-hour for each day of the week. I kind of took this into college, and I did this for college. I did this when I first got out of college. Like, I did this in my early years of adulthood, and it worked really well for me for a very long time. But when I started having kids and I started pursuing business and just the different things that I started to do, it became a little bit crazy. Everything seemed to compete with one another. And so what I try to do is try to multitask a little better, try different time management systems, and try to create like the perfect schedule. But when I started practicing a 24-hour Sabbath, I started realizing like, oh, wait, if I'm taking off a full day to rest, I need to make sure that the other 6 days I'm getting these things done, like I'm tending to these things. Otherwise, I don't have the 7th day to do that. And so I started asking myself, like, how can I better use my time? Right? Eventually coming to understand, like, I don't use my time. I can't manage this time. I can't do anything with the time. I can only steward my response and acknowledgement of that time limit that I'm inside of. I only have 24 hours in a day. How am I going to show up and respond to that limitation each day? That's the question. And I think that this got solidified for me too when watching my kids just completely ignore time limits. If you have kids in your home, you know what I'm talking about. Like, I'll tell them, hey, we need to leave in 30 minutes. It means nothing to them. They don't pay attention. Or, hey, you only have 30 more minutes on the Xbox. 45 minutes later. Then we have to set timers, right, to bring awareness to the fact that time is continuing on, and their response is to completely ignore it, realizing that we do the same thing as adults. We think we can somehow get around all the limitations of time, and we can't. We can only control our response to it, and it's really vitally important that we acknowledge that. Now, I am not perfect in this. I am constantly having to readjust. My biggest problem, I will be honest, is not paying attention to the limits within the limits. I have time blocked on my calendar, and there are days when I just have a really hard time respecting that and honoring that and having the self-control to say, this is what this time is for right now. These hours are going to continue on with or without me. Whether I do this task during this time block or not, those hours are going to keep going on. Like somebody started the machine, the conveyor belt is running, and I can either choose to do the task that the conveyor belt is asking me to do in that moment, or I can completely ignore it, and the items that are on the conveyor belt are just going to fall off. That's what we're working with. I hope by now I have convinced you to stop saying time management and time stewardship. And you might feel like I'm splitting hairs, but I think that it is really important that the words that we use reflect what we truly are being asked to do. God has not tasked us with managing or stewarding time. Time does not belong to us. We are not rulers over it. It essentially rules over us. It moves us forward. Our bodies are constantly responding to the solar and lunar cycles. Our bodies are aging. We are moving forward in time, whether we want to or not. And so we are not asked to rule over time. We cannot. We can only control how we respond to that limitation. And I think that when we rightly say that, when we rightly identify where our responsibility lies, it's not in hacking the time system. It is in being disciplined to first identify what it is that we are entrusted to steward, and then allocating our 24-hour time frame, the 24-hour limit, saying I'm going to do this during this time, this during this time, and then doing it. Because we can either respond to the fact that we have a time limit or not. We can only steward how we conduct ourselves within that time limit that we have been placed inside. And so this week, I hope that you stop asking yourself, how can I manage my time better? How can I steward my time better? And instead, first start with the question, what has God actually asked me to steward? What has He entrusted to me? And then the next layer of that is within the time limit of a 24-hour day, 7 days a week, 1 day of rest, 6 days of work, within that framework, within that limit of time, how can I best respond? How can I best conduct myself to steward these areas well? That's what we need to be asking ourselves. And I think that is a good place to be at because it humbly acknowledges that the things that we can control and gives to God the things that we can't. Because at the end of the day, time keeps moving forward and He's the one who's in control of it. Before we go, I want to pray over us. Father God, thank you that you remind us that we are finite beings and you are an infinite God. Thank you that outcomes don't depend on us, that the ruling over time does not depend on us, that we are simply responding within the construct that you placed us inside of. Lord, in our lives and through our creative stewardship, may your kingdom come for our good and for your glory. In your precious name I pray, amen. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you next week.